I am Daniel Cruz with Air Justice, and I'm sitting here with Remington Smith, who is the filmmaker behind the Rubbertown documentary. So I think the first question I'm going to ask is just like, when do you remember first becoming aware of the air quality problems in West Louisville?
Yeah, it was interesting. I had lived in Louisville for about a decade, but I had left for grad school, and I had just happened to be in town and picked up the Leo and saw an article about a proposal to create another coal ash pond out in the West End. And that had just kind of struck me as interesting because in the article it said there were already ash ponds out that way. And so it was an area of Louisville that I grew up primarily around Iroquois Park, and then I went to Central, but I wasn't really super far out west often. And so that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of just out of idle curiosity. Well, what are these ash ponds they're talking about? And that's when I read about the TVA ash spill in 2008, where it's just like all this heavy carcinogenic sludge that was basically a tidal wave that wiped out neighborhoods with this material. And so the idea of putting another one of these in a neighborhood that I was learning was already with higher rates of cancer and things like that was the kind of dangling thread that I pulled at. And then all of a sudden it became first I thought it might be a feature film idea about somebody battling these issues, and then became a documentary when I thought I would shoot a short documentary to maybe fundraise, and then people would encourage me to turn it into something longer.
When Dr. Poole had us all like watch the movie, and I remember like everybody just being really disturbed by it, and I think it speaks to like most of the people that were watching it are from Louisville, but most of them were from East Louisville, and they didn't even really know that these problems existed. Why do you think that is, that like even people who are like, like they're in college in Louisville, some of them have grown up here all their lives, they've just never really heard of it? Do you think it's an ignorance issue, or the fact that people don't necessarily want this information to be talked about a lot?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. Part of it is legitimately like time. Like, how much time do people really have in their daily lives to go out and explore parts of their city that they're not familiar with? And so filmmaking gives me an excuse to continue being curious and explore in the way that I would as a kid. But also, like, highways have really segregated us in such a way that we don't even drive through neighborhoods anymore. We literally drive over them. So even if you happen to, say, go to Thunder River, Louisville, and there's a pile up, and it's better to go around through the Waterson instead of straight through on 64 or whatever, you're literally just going over Bell's Lane. You're literally going over parts of the West End of Louisville that you might have otherwise actually had to interact with, even as a drive-through experience. And so I think this does propose a real challenge, primarily to white people in Louisville, where you have to intentionally steer yourself into spaces that I think that developers and sometimes city governments don't want you to really pay much attention to, and see where there is a need in the city to serve communities that have historically just been disregarded. The Air Pollution Control District needs to have more teeth in terms of finding people. It does need to be a situation where you're either protecting the residents and being a good neighbor, or you need to leave. And right now, it doesn't seem like the city has any sort of interest in trying to hold the company's feet to the fire in that way. And this is the same issue with police accountability. There are civilian review boards, but do the civilian review boards have any sort of teeth in terms of, are they able to punish police officers? Are they able to change things structurally if they're not meeting the obligations that the community have said that they want to see? It makes you a part of the community, and you're in the line of fire, and therefore you're going to show up more. But too often, it seems like people flee for the suburbs, and I think because of these environmental issues, but as the film demonstrates, only people with money have that option. And so if people with money actually stick around, then I think that's indirectly, one way or another, going to force them to engage a little bit more. So I don't know, those are a couple of the things, and following the leadership of the folks that are already there, build with the people who have already been building and give them more resources and more people to show up at city council meetings. Because just like they say in the film, if it's just Charles and Ebony and Monica coming to every city council meeting, it doesn't really do much. But if there's an air pollution thing on the agenda and it's a ton of different people that are backing them up, then there might be more response to those needs.
You mentioned the idea of, I think a lot of the more, if there are people who are living in those neighborhoods who are more affluent, they are going to kind of tend to just cut their losses and maybe move to the Highlands or something. And I think that speaks to this intersection that there is in West Louisville of like race and class and environmental issues all kind of piling on to a place where it's largely just the poorest residents who do happen to be Black who are being affected by most of this. And you mentioned the police issue too, and I thought that was an interesting point in the movie that your little like interaction with that cop, and not just that, but the way that I don't remember his name, but the gentleman who was like watching the footage with you.
Yeah, Charles.
That he just knew he knew exactly who the cop was and was like, she's always giving us trouble, and said like, the kind of harsh reality of it is that if it had been him, that it might have gone worse. It could have gone a number of different ways. So,
well, this is part of the reason why I do doc in this way, is that you're spending enough time with people that you start to get an idea of how to position yourself in a way to get things that, there's not any found footage or archival footage of Charles and Ebony out there, or Monica. So what's the next best thing? If they're telling me this is what their experience has been like trying to protest, well, I'm going to put myself out there and see if we can kind of recreate that to a certain degree. It can hopefully ignite this conversation of what kind of response the community gets when they're out there, but to acknowledge the fact that, I'm out there still as a white guy, and so Charles is able to comment on what that's like. So even that comes with a qualifier. This is what it's like, but also not exactly.
As for like the people who participated in the making of the documentary, I know that we got a little bit of closure in like the final moments, but do you know like has there been any kind of significant progress made on like the house or just anything else that's going on in their lives that was hinted at in the movie that you know about?
No, I mean, last I heard, Monica still hadn't moved her house, and I think she was dealing with her own health issues. Ebony is still out there trying to work on things related to React. But Charles had told me often that like there would be a peak in terms of when they would be working the hardest, and then, but they still have full-time jobs and lives with family members that they've got to take care of and whatnot. And so it's very different from the lobbyists and the folks that actually work at the chemical companies, where they're getting paid for all their time. And so it's really remarkable that people spend any amount of time on this, because it's not paid and they have to, take time out of very busy lives. I think there's a gap in understanding what are the human stories and how can we tell those. And so that was ultimately why I don't throw a bunch of stats, really. I don't bring in scientists or anything. I thought it was more important for us, if we've got the news covering those things, let's just meet some of the people who live there. Let's just get to know them and connect with them on a human level. And then that might make more of an impact. And then hopefully that would encourage people to dare to go west, just daring not to be afraid and to continue to be curious. So I hope, if nothing else, that it reminds people that that's really all the movie is, and that's all that it requires us to be, is just not to be afraid. How would we interact with people and places as if we were 10 years old, instead of nightly murder reports making us afraid of places without ever actually directly interacting with it? And it seems like there's a lot of commentary around like where I live by Iroquois Park, or the places that I go to, like down by the walking bridge, the pedestrian bridge, where everyone's like, oh, it's so dangerous, da-da-da. I was like, have you actually been there? Have you actually spent time there on a weekend where everybody's just out having a nice time, like being a part of the community instead of afraid of each other all the time? So anyways, that's my big long spiel. But if people want to check out the film, it's on Amazon Prime.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me to have a discussion about the movie.
Yeah, go make movies.